Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Paris Schutz here on our Northwest Side studio.
And I'm Brandis Friedman reporting live from Chicago's North Lawndale neighborhood.
On the show tonight.
No one is above the law, not even the President of the United States.
A second impeachment trial awaits President Trump as he belatedly condemns the deadly violence at the Capitol.
This is unacceptable.
A lot happened in Springfield besides the selection of a new Illinois House Speaker. We've got the legislative scorecard.
Everything that was happening before was just amplified by the pandemic.
Brandis Friedman is live in North Lawndale for the latest stop in our In Your Neighborhood series. Providing critical care to some of the most vulnerable COVID patients. 2 respiratory therapists on their work during the pandemic.
I'm Angelito, and tonight I'll have more on how a Chicago teen is incorporating art and STEM to continue Dr. King's message of unity.
And Jeffrey Bayer has the scoop on some Chicago ice cream history in Ask Jeffrey. But first,
in Paris, as we mentioned, I'm in North Lawndale, where I'll be co-anchoring tonight from Chicago's North Lawndale community, as I said, as part of our Chicago Tonight in Your Neighborhood series. And we're going to check in with a number of community groups here who have had to come together to help provide food and services to the community members here still struggling amid this pandemic. We'll have that and more. Paris.
All right, Brandis, thank you. And now to some of today's top stories. President-elect Joe Biden addressed the nation within the past hour. He announced a nearly $2 trillion COVID stimulus proposal that includes $1,400 direct checks to individuals and families, $400 billion in pandemic relief funds, and $350 billion for state and local governments like Illinois and Chicago to stem some of the resultant budget shortfalls. Now, the address comes as the Labor Department reports more than 1 million new unemployment claims last week, and that's up 25% from the week before. Biden says the plan is necessary to combat this raging pandemic and cratering economy that has exacerbated economic inequality.
That we're in the middle of the once-in-several-generations economic crisis with a once-in-several-generations public health crisis. The crisis of deep human suffering is in plain sight, and there's no time to waste. We have to act, and we have to act now.
And Chicago's getting more mass COVID-19 vaccination sites for healthcare workers. 2 new sites open today at City Colleges of Chicago locations, with 3 more coming online early next week. Now, the city says it is still in phase 1A of the vaccination, meaning up to 400,000 Chicago healthcare workers are eligible. But Mayor Lori Lightfoot again called on the federal government to speed up the vaccine distribution. She says the amount of vaccines delivered have been going in the wrong direction.
2 weeks ago, the number fell to 38,000 first doses. Last week, the number dropped to 32,000 first doses. That is clearly the opposite direction of where we need to be going. At the rate we've been on, Chicago won't be fully vaccinated for another 1.5 years, and that is completely and totally unacceptable.
And Lightfoot says she wants the authority to be able to reopen Chicago bars and restaurants. Lightfoot today again called on Governor J.B. Pritzker to allow the relaxing of some COVID-19 restrictions as quickly as possible, as a spike that materialized in late October of last year appears to have leveled off a bit. Pritzker's office says that neither Chicago nor Cook County have reached the metric level for a partial reopen. And Illinois public health officials report 6,600 new COVID-19 cases today and 88 additional deaths. The statewide case total is now more than 1,052,000 cases, along with 17,928 deaths. The 7-day test positivity rate right now is a flat 8%. All eyes are on the Senate after the House votes for a second time to impeach President Donald Trump for his role in inciting the violent insurrection that took place at the Capitol on January 6. After a week of soft condemnation and silence, the president put out a video statement last night.
I want to be very clear. I unequivocally condemn the violence that we saw last week. Violence and vandalism have absolutely no place in our country and no place in our movement. Mob violence goes against everything I believe in and everything our movement stands for.
And joining us to talk about the impending impeachment trial are William Howell, professor in American politics at the University of Chicago, Harris School of Public Policy, as well as the Political Science Department. He's also the director of the Center for Effective Government. And Heidi Kitrosser, a visiting professor of constitutional law at Northwestern University Law School. Welcome both of you back to Chicago tonight. Will Howell, what is the point of carrying out an impeachment trial in the Senate if it's going to happen under a Biden administration?
Well, there are two things that we can look to. The first is that should they succeed in convicting in the Senate, and that's probably unlikely, but should they manage to do so, they then will be afforded an opportunity to cast a vote on a majoritarian basis about whether to ban Trump from holding office evermore. So that's significant, particularly when you think about a president who has none too subtly hinted at his interest in running in 2024. The bigger reason, though, has to do with managing the public's expectations about what constitutes proper presidential conduct. And there's just a ton of work to be done on that front. There's a real reason why we need to see a real repudiation from Congress that goes beyond the select willingness of individual members of Congress to show up on Sunday morning talk shows and say that they wish it hadn't happened, but to do something official.
And indeed, only 10 Republican members of the House voted for the impeachment. Heidi Kitrosser, there's some question today as to whether a post-presidency impeachment trial is even constitutional. What's your read on that?
Yeah, so there is a little bit of scholarly debate about that. In fact, there was a very good article today in the New York Times by one law professor, Steve Blodek, making the case it is. There was an article in the Washington Post the other day by former Judge Michael Ludig making the argument that it's not constitutional. I think the better argument is that it is indeed constitutional. First of all, the very fact that the Constitution's text creates the option of disqualification for future office as an option after conviction suggests that it just wouldn't be logical not to make impeachment an option even after one's term has ended. Otherwise, it would be all too easy, right, for someone simply to avoid being disqualified by resigning before they could be impeached. Second of all, there is some historical evidence indicating that indeed the founders were well aware of the possibility of post-term impeachment. And historically in the U.S., there have been some impeachments of lower-level officers after they have left office. So I think that's a better argument.
So there is precedent there in terms of lower-level officers. Will Howell, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell is not going to call the Senate back, as we mentioned, until the new term starts, January 19th. No activity would happen on this until Biden is sworn in. What we know about Mitch McConnell is he loves being in the majority. He's a very political animal. But from reporting, apparently he also wants to purge Donald Trump from the party. So what's the political calculation McConnell's making here?
Well, I think you've just pointed to it, which is that on the one hand, he doesn't like Trump. He sees the rise of populism within his party as being potentially destructive. But he also isn't, one to shake this tree. He's been in power for the last 4 years and has done precious little to take on this president in a serious-minded way. He won't be the majority leader going forward. It's going to be Chuck Schumer who's going to decide the terms of the Senate trial that we're going to observe. And if what happened in the House is provides any insight into what's likely to happen to the Senate, only 10 Republicans out of the more than 200 there saw fit to vote for impeachment. They're going to need in the Senate to go 17 for 50 if they're going to actually convict, and that seems pretty unlikely. McConnell's kind of hesitation or the little dance he's performing right now notwithstanding.
And Heidi Kitrosser, could a Senate impeachment trial upend the early Biden agenda when he wants to get off to a fast start on COVID, on economic relief, and on confirmation of his cabinet appointments?
Yeah, well, that is a concern, and it's a concern that Biden has certainly indicated. Is one that he wants to put COVID relief and some of the other challenges facing the country front and center. That said, there is the possibility of sort of double tracking things so that the Senate for part of the day could handle the confirmation or could handle the impeachment trial. And for part of the day could consider legislation such as COVID relief, et cetera. So I think that the balance can be struck, but it is somewhat tricky.
And Will, how do you see the broader shakeout happening in the Republican Party? As we mentioned, McConnell and certain other, perhaps more establishment figures want Trump gone from their party. They see it as a cancer to their party. But Trump still is the most popular figure in the party, and the more grassroots folks still stand behind him. How's that going to play out?
Well, we're going to see. I mean, I think that Trump is leaving office does not mean that populism is just going to dissipate from our midst, that he got 74, my dyslexia, 74 million votes in the general election. 139 Republicans saw fit, even in the aftermath, the immediate aftermath of the last week's insurrection, to propagate his lies about the election having been stolen. There are a whole lineup of folks who would love to pick up the mantle of populism and carry it forward. So sure, Trump as an individual may be taking a step back, but he remains incredibly popular, and populism has decidedly taken hold of this party. And there are very few signs that that's gonna change in the immediate future.
And it's such a different Washington, D.C. now, folks talking about all the National Guard troops. It looks like a fortified zone in a war-torn country. Heidi Kitrosser, in the aftermath of January 6th, what about the United States' strength around the world as the exporter of democracy because of its example back home? How does what happened, complicate Biden's agenda both at home and abroad?
Yeah, well, I think that this does add to Biden's agenda the need to show that the United States continues to take very seriously the notion of living under the rule of law, freedom of the press, peaceful transfer of power, etc. So many norms and adherence to values have been upended in this administration, and that is heard loud and clear around the world. And so it's true that that is among the tasks that is really important for the Biden administration to carry out.
And Will, we've always celebrated the peaceful transfer of power in the United States. I don't know that you can say this is a peaceful transfer of power. I think that's already kind of left the building. Is there any parallel to this situation and any worries you have about the inauguration next week?
For sure. I mean, there are lots of concerns about violence, of course, but much of the damage, frankly, has already been done. That both in terms of the spread of misinformation, the disinformation campaign from this president, the failure of this president to cooperate with the incoming administration to ensure not just that there's a peaceful transfer of power, but that there's a seamless transfer of power. That is, that the work that's going on within bureaucracies and on the diplomacy fronts can continue without too much disruption. This is an incredibly lost opportunity we've observed over the last couple of months. Worse still, what we've seen is, again, the final throes of a populist president who's doing everything he can to leave damage and destruction in his wake. It's been really awful.
And it certainly seems like, at the very least, beyond the inauguration, it could lead to an insurrectionist movement that sticks around in the United States for a while. All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Our thanks to William Howell and Heidi Kitrosser. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
House Speaker Michael Madigan is out. House Speaker Chris Welch is in. You know that much. So what else did Illinois' General Assembly do these past few days while they were in session? Well, it turns out a lot. Amanda Vinicky is live at the Capitol with more. Amanda, give us the rundown.
You know, Paris, the Capitol is once again relatively empty after a busy couple of days. And actually, up until then, it had been 230 days since the Illinois legislature had last convened. What would have normally been a very busy several months was all canceled because of COVID-19. And so a lot built up in that time, including a major focus of this lame duck session, and that is a package put forth by the Black Caucus in the wake of George Floyd's killing.
The Illinois Legislative Black Caucus agenda will ensure that we're addressing the pandemics that exist in our society. 1, the systematic racism, 2, violence, and now COVID-19.
So that Black Caucus agenda is extensive. One provision of it would limit to 36% the interest that payday loan lenders can charge.
How many of you want to get a credit card maybe from Macy's or Neiman Marcus at 80%, 99%. This is preying on certain communities. It's really targeting. It's all it is. It's a remake, a rebirth of redlining, housing covenants, and all the other ills that have decimated my community. And what we're trying to do is ensure that they have an opportunity to build economic stability.
Now, that measure passed despite concerns that it will leave low-income individuals without any access to capital.
There are many citizens, not just in Illinois, but all across the country, who don't necessarily have the credit rating that would allow them to go to the top shelf lending institutions and borrow money, but nevertheless have a cash need or a capital need, maybe short term. It may be to put a new roof on the house or repair a car.
Republicans also raising concerns about another measure that restricts employers from making hiring decisions based on a job applicant's criminal history. They laid out scenarios of employers being at risk of breaking the law when they say those employers are just trying to look out for their business.
I feel like I have fallen into an episode of hypotheticals gone wild, with all of these various nightmare scenarios looking for a way to make this bill the boogeyman. Again, we are at a critical point in our history. We have generations of errors and injustices to correct for.
Another pillar of that Black Caucus agenda, in fact, maybe the biggest one, deals with policing and criminal justice, and we are going to delve into that on WTTW's Black Voices on Sunday at 6 p.m. Now, in part because of COVID-19, Illinois' budget is in a world of hurt, and Governor J.B. Pritzker's solution, partially anyway, is to bring some additional money into state coffers by eliminating a tax break for certain businesses. This is a tax break that the federal government actually recently created and provided for businesses that were hurting and losing money because of COVID-19. It is called decoupling, and Republicans were furious about it.
Now, I understand that the governor doesn't have a lot of empathy and a lot of understanding for the struggles of small business owners, but this is unacceptable.
I would like to know one reason why any business would want to come to Illinois or stay in Illinois. We're treating our small businesses, especially with this decoupling, shamefully. They need our help.
This is a $1 billion tax increase. Everybody needs to wake up. This is a tax increase on small businesses.
But Governor and other backers of this say that there have to be some tough choices made right now, and at this point, Illinois cannot afford to give additional tax breaks to business.
When we're talking about taxing businesses out of existence, that's a bit of an overreach to me, and I'll say to the bill. What we're talking about to the bill, this is a deficit increase if we don't pass this.
The decisions in the 102nd General Assembly are not going to be easy. This makes balancing the budget a much more palatable circumstance for our constituents.
But it was not just Republicans who were not on board. Democrats have more than enough members to be able to pass any bill without even a single GOP vote. And that decoupling plan, well, it did not have enough support to pass. It was among many measures that didn't get their way to Governor J.B. Pritzker's desk, either for lack of support or for lack of time. And that includes, for example, an elected school board for Chicago public schools, anything to do with ethics, and also something that would have allowed the General Assembly to not have to go for such a long stretch without meeting again. Though they did talk about it, no bill on the way to Governor J.B. Pritzker's desk that would allow legislators to meet remotely, say, over Zoom. So from Springfield, back to you, Paris.
All right, Amanda, a lot on the agenda there. Thank you so much. And last summer, we visited one of Chicago's more historic neighborhoods, but that same neighborhood has faced challenges of economic depression and unemployment, violence, and of course, the pandemic. For this week's stop in our In Your Neighborhood series, Brandis Friedman and producer Quinn Myers traveled back to North Lawndale to find out how the community is faring 11 months into the pandemic. And Brandis, you join us from an area that's gotten a lot of attention in the last year. Tell us about that.
Yeah, that's right, Pierce. You know, we wanted to go ahead and spotlight one of the successes of this community right away. We are standing in Douglas Park, which until last year had been named for Stephen Douglas. He was an Illinois, not legislator, but an Illinois politician who profited off of the slave trade in the 1800s. Well, a campaign from the community led by students at Village Leadership Academy. It led the city's park district to rename this park for abolitionist Frederick Douglass.
The Village Leadership Academy students, Afrofuturists, because right before the pandemic, we went to a hearing for them to talk about it, and there was like they weren't receptive to it at all, and they had been there a number of times. But seeing everything that happened after the death of George Floyd and the response in the cities all over the country, and then to see the change, it was really emotional for me to watch that last hearing.
Now, that last hearing she's referring to, it was in July when the Chicago Park District Board unanimously agreed to change the park's name after that years-long effort led by students and the community. Pollard says because the signs reflecting the park's name change were just replaced late last year, the community hasn't really had the opportunity to celebrate the way they would like to, and that's especially because of the pandemic and, of course, the cold weather. Now, the coronavirus has hit this community especially hard. Certainly not the worst, but it does have a 12.1% positivity rate. Now, this zip code where we are, 60623, it also is shared with Little Village, but there are zip codes south of here where the positivity rate gets higher, all the way up to 16%. All of this compared to the city's positivity rate of 9.7% as of today. Now, this community, though it is historic, it still has needs. Deshawn Branch Pollard, who you just heard from, she says that her organization, the North Lawndale Community Coordinating Council, was working on a quality of life plan a year ago until the pandemic hit. Volunteers were working to address housing, workforce development, and since then, they've had to shift focus.
Everything that was happening before was just amplified by the pandemic. So, you know, there were housing needs, there were food insecurity needs. Before the pandemic, it was just amplified, and we saw, you know, a lot of people losing their jobs, not having money to pay their rent.
Now, some of the support that the council has been lending the community, it includes food giveaways, diaper drives, donating masks, and other PPE. So this is a working class community with more than 50% of residents earning $50,000 or less. It is also a predominantly black community with 88% of the residents being black. One of those longtime residents and business owners, many of us remember from our In Your Neighborhood stop here last summer, he's Edwin Muldrow of Delcar Pharmacy on 16th Street, which has been here since the 60s. We wanted to check in with him again, and he says he's definitely noticed residents are struggling and gone into what he calls survival mode, but he does his best to lend support as well.
I know what I've done as far as helping people, you know, is with medication or even at my mini mart next door, if you need assist with groceries or even just simple delivery, because a lot of times you don't have the means to get out and go to pick up your medicine or pick up some milk or whatever.
Now, also here in the North Lawndale community is Sinai Hospital. It's a safety net hospital, and that means there they treat patients regardless of their ability to pay. One of the hospital's leaders of infectious diseases says the hospital has been hit hard by COVID. They're noticing a lot of multi-generational impacts on the patients they're serving. Additionally, she says about 40% of the staff has been vaccinated for the coronavirus, and that is on par with what other hospitals are doing as well. But as within the community, there are also healthcare workers who are hesitant about the vaccine.
Even healthcare workers are human, and it's a new vaccine, so there's a lot of concerns about the novelty of the vaccine, a lot of concerns about, you know, potential issues if somebody's pregnant, particularly if it's an early pregnancy. There have been questions from caregivers who have recently had COVID.
And I should mention that Dr. Mohapatra there says that, the hospital is providing that one-on-one counseling to answer questions with healthcare workers if they are concerned about getting that COVID-19 vaccine. And coming up later on, we're going to hear from the alderman here, Michael Scott. And as I mentioned, this is a historic neighborhood, so we're going to have a little bit more on that later on as well. Paris.
All right. Yep, we'll look forward to that, Brandis. And up next, ways to celebrate Martin Luther King Jr. Day virtually, so please stick around.
What can you tell us about how Chicago small businesses are doing? These are more than just shopping centers for the community. They're gathering places where they maintain their culture.
And there's much more ahead on the program, including how respiratory therapists have been working through the pandemic. But first, Martin Luther King Day is coming Monday, and artists throughout the city are finding creative ways to celebrate King's movement in virtual celebrations. Arts correspondent Angel Ito shares more.
We wanted to showcase how Martin Luther King Jr. works in tandem with every single letter of STEM. Like, he is science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. He's not just like a leader. He's not just the civil rights leader. Like, he has done everything under that umbrella that you could think of.
This Martin Luther King Day, 14-year-old Dorothy Jean Tillman is using her passion for education to highlight Dr. King's impact in STEAM-related fields in a virtual celebration. It will be live streamed from the Harold Washington Cultural Center. From dance and musical numbers to excerpts from some of his most prominent speeches,
I call upon you to take your money out of the banks downtown and put your money in Tri-State Bank.
to science experiments. Tillman's mother says the afternoon's assembly highlights the impact of art and science working together.
Them and STEAM, they're a team, and it's all about unity. And ultimately, the ultimate goal is to make sure that young people know that this is something that they can do. This is something that is a choice, and it's that Dr. King fought for them to have the right to be able to learn and excel in any field.
But unity isn't the only message of Dr. King that Chicago artists will be celebrating. Over at the Black Ensemble Theater, they'll be having their 10th MLK Day production in collaboration with the African American Arts Alliance. Founder and CEO of the theater, Jackie Taylor, says she hopes the annual showcase reinforces empathy and humanity.
That's what Dr. King preached more than anything. It wasn't about revenge. We either love each other, learn how to love and care for each other, and I mean that on a worldwide basis.
Regardless, actress Dawn Bless says she hopes viewers are able to see how art has helped progress Dr. King's movement.
The arts are forced to evolve, and we always do. I think that we're actually, as artists and artisans and all of this creative people, I think we're on the verge of a renaissance, another renaissance. And I'm actually very excited because it's just forcing people to really get creative with their creativity.
Art reflecting change was most recently seen this summer with a rise in public art.
So much of what Martin Luther King Jr. was speaking to through his political lens was that idea of claiming space, of claiming self, of pride.
Dorian will join a group of Black muralists of all ages to discuss the impact of this mural movement in one of many MLK Day celebrations at the Hyde Park Art Center.
This period in protest has really just kind of ignited so much more conversation about what public space should be and mean, and how we can engage it to create more camaraderie. It's not enough just to have an individual opinion, but how do we come together and find commonalities in terms of our direction?
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Angel Ito.
Now you can join the celebration of Dr. King's life and legacy virtually this Monday. We've got the full details on our website. And still to come on Chicago Tonight, our In Your Neighborhood series takes us to North Lawndale, where we check in with community leaders to hear how they've been impacted by COVID-19. They're critical to the care of most vulnerable coronavirus patients. We hear from two respiratory therapists on their work during the pandemic. And Jeffrey Bayer has the scoop on some Chicago ice cream history in tonight's Ask Jeffrey. But first, some more of today's top stories. The Chicago Police Department announces disciplinary action against officers who were caught on camera sleeping and lounging in the offices of Congressman Bobby Rush during riots last summer. A group of 13 officers, which included 3 supervisors, were captured on video surveillance footage discovered by Rush's staff and then turned over to the city. A spokesperson for the Chicago Police Department would confirm only that the investigation of the incident was complete, but did not say how many officers were disciplined and what exactly that discipline would be. Differing accounts of how many COVID cases have broken out in Chicago public schools. CPS puts the official number at 4 total presumed positive cases among more than 1,000 tests administered to students and staff. The CPS statistics don't identify which schools have seen positive cases, but the Chicago Teachers Union puts the number at 20 schools with positive COVID cases. And today, a group of Teachers Union school nurses protested the return to in-person learning.
Our fight today is not a game. It's not a joke. We see the effects of this disease on people in this city.
And now we check back in with Friedman, who's co-anchoring tonight in North Lawndale on the west side. It's part of our Chicago Tonight in Your Neighborhood series. Brandis.
Yeah, that's right, Paris. You know, earlier today we spoke with 24th Ward Alderman Michael Scott, and I started by asking him about how this community is coping 10 months into this COVID-19 pandemic.
In and around North Lawndale, there aren't many things to do, and that's part of my job, is trying to figure out how to bring more amenities to this community, and not having those amenities and not having the ability to do anything, even in the summer, was rough. And now that everything's closed down in and around Chicago, you can't go downtown. Many of my community members are stuck in the house and wondering, just when this COVID thing is going to end, when they're going to get the vaccine, when they're going to see some light at the end of the tunnel.
Economically, we were driving through earlier and I noticed a business that we spoke to this summer, had its door closed today, and we haven't called them yet to find out why, but how are businesses, what's the economics like here?
Again, even before COVID, we were having problems. COVID just exacerbated those problems, exacerbated those issues. And so what we'll continue to do is, work on new businesses, black-owned businesses. We actually have a fund that we've created here in the ward where we raised about $150,000 where we will give to new community businesses, hopefully in the summer to start up and get when the getting is good, when the weather's warm and people can come out and frequent the business.
How would you rate the vaccine rollout at this point? And also, what are you hearing from your community members with regard to vaccine hesitancy?
So I would give it a incomplete. I think we're still trying to figure out just who, when, where, and how. What I will say, though, is members in my community, members in my family, members of the African American community in general have a mixed bag about the vaccine and how it should be rolled out, if they should get it or not. I was talking to an individual the other day who was telling me how they really want the vaccine, and when things are available, please let them know. And then I was having a conversation with a relative of mine who just didn't feel comfortable and couldn't understand the speed and the rollout of how they got the vaccine the way that it is. And so I think it's a mixed bag of sorts.
Yesterday, we reported that there will be no citywide registry. Dr. Arwady saying that most folks will get that vaccine through their doctor, but a lot of folks don't have a primary physician that they would go to. What do you think we need to be doing to make sure that when the vaccine is available to more people, that more people are able to get it?
So one of the things that I've mentioned to the administration, to Dr. Arwady herself, is, meeting people where they are. Like you said, in a community like North Lawndale, we don't have a lot of health centers. We don't have a lot of places where people go and have a primary care physician. And so we have to go to the places where they will go. I was talking to a lawyer friend of mine the other day who works for a community organization here in North Lawndale who does drug treatment facility. It's a drug treatment facility, and wants to see if they could get the vaccine, because he knows a lot of people get their health care there. Their mental health, their physical health, they're kind of like a catch-all. And so we have to figure out those places where people go so we can meet them where they are.
You're also chair of the City Council Education Committee. You hosted a hearing on Monday about CPS's reopening plan. Do you think it was the right time, knowing what we know about cases, to reopen schools?
So there's never going to be the exact right time. What I do know is that there are a lot of children in communities like North Lawndale, like Inglewood, like Back of the Yards, where we have a lot of people of color that just aren't getting the educational needs met by e-learning. And so we have to think of another thing to do to make sure that our children, it's not a lost generation.
There have been some COVID cases reported in several schools. A lot of local school councils are concerned about reopening, and they're very resistant to it. What do you say to those folks, though, especially in communities where the rates are higher and they just don't trust CPS's plan?
I think this is kind of all wrapped around like the mistrust of government. We talked about the virus and people having mistrust. People have mistrust in government as it is. And so what I would say to people is you have to do your own research. You have to feel comfortable yourself. And that's why CPS has the option of people going and not going. And so if you feel like it is not the right time and you're not comfortable, there's still going to be e-learning. We're still going to make sure that people are educated the way that they can be, whether it's at home, whether it's in person. And so, never going to be the right time until COVID is gone away. But we got to do the best for our children that we can.
In Paris, in just a few minutes, we're actually going to hear from a local church in the community about how they've pivoted during this pandemic. We'll see you in a few minutes.
All right, Brandis, we'll look forward to that. And now to Phil Ponce for a look at the work of respiratory therapists during this pandemic. Phil.
Paris is a profession many people may not know much about, and they're providing critical care during this pandemic. Respiratory therapists are the healthcare workers trained to use ventilators, a machine needed by some of the sickest COVID patients. Even before the pandemic, there was a shortage of respiratory therapists, a problem that's now become more apparent. Joining us now to talk about their work amid the pandemic are Brady Scott. He's a respiratory therapist at Rush Medical Center. He's also an associate professor at Rush University and the director of clinical education for respiratory care. And Nida Perez, a respiratory therapist at UI Health. And thank you both for joining us. Nida Perez, as I mentioned, a lot of people may not know exactly what a respiratory therapist does. How do you describe what you do?
Well, a respiratory therapist, in our role, we treat and assess patients. We take care of patients with various lung diseases and lung infections such as COPD, asthma, lung cancer, and now COVID.
Brady Scott, how would you describe the role of respiratory therapists amidst this COVID pandemic?
Well, a lot of the individuals that we're taking care of because they're dealing with COVID are in pretty severe respiratory failure. So a lot of respiratory therapists are using devices to help them breathe easier, to improve their oxygen levels. Sometimes we have to use devices to breathe for them if they're critically ill. So we respiratory therapists do this for a lot of folks, but the COVID-19 population are really challenging us during this time.
So you use devices other than respirators themselves. There are other tools at your disposal. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. So we make a lot of attempts to try to keep people off those mechanical ventilators in the first place. So something that we use commonly would be high flow nasal cannula oxygen therapy or non-invasive ventilation, which is similar to putting a patient on the breathing machines with the endotracheal tube, but it's actually without the tube. So the patient doesn't have to be sedated heavily and paralyzed and those type of things. So it's a way to keep patients awake and prevent them from going on those machines in the first place.
Nida Perez, we understand that a patient's condition can change very dramatically, very quickly. Could you talk about that in any experience you've had?
Absolutely. Well, I've seen due to the media, a lot of people try to simplify COVID and say it's not real, it's not serious. And I think that has caused delay in a lot of our patients coming into the ER. And by the time they do come to the ER, they need to be on oxygen, like Brady was saying, a nasal cannula. And depending on how low their oxygen levels are, we've seen it where we had to start them on high flow nasal cannula or BiPAP or CPAP. With BiPAP and CPAP, we could regulate their oxygenation very well by drawing their blood and checking their oxygenation levels. But unfortunately, there are times where it's just too grave and we do have to intubate.
And Brady Scott, how about that? How quickly can a patient's condition change?
very quickly. If you're referring to the COVID-19 and the individuals with COVID-19, I have to be frank, some of those folks really deteriorate very, very quickly with us. As she just said, you know, some folks come to the emergency room and they're very sick and they deteriorate very quickly and have to be placed on those mechanical ventilators in the emergency department, even before they're admitted, you know, to the floor of the hospital or an ICU bed. So, and then we're even seeing folks that have been admitted still deteriorate at the bedside and have to be intubated, which is that means putting the breathing tube in very quickly. So that's pretty common, actually.
Nida Perez, we understand, as we mentioned, that there is a shortage of respiratory therapists. And what can you tell us about burnout that some respiratory therapists might be experiencing? For example, what kinds of hours are a lot of you working?
Well, we're working our normal shifts and covering extra shifts. You know, some of our staff also test positive and then they're gone for 2 weeks at a time. So we're picking up the slack from that. Or there's just so many patients on ventilators. Our point system that we work on, the points are very high, requiring extra respiratory therapists that we do not have. So we have seeked out agency therapists to come and help us on staff. And, you know, we're working 12, 16-hour days, sometimes 5, 6 times a week, rather than our normal 3 to 4 shifts a week.
Brady Scott, how about that? How do you assess the shortage in your profession and what it means in this moment?
Well, as you clearly said in the beginning, we had a shortage in the profession even before the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think that what this pandemic is just highlighted that reality. You know, our respiratory therapists have been asked to work a lot of hours, shifts they don't normally work. During the surge, some respiratory therapists went from their like pulmonary function labs back to working at the bedside again. And, you know, a lot of people shifted around. So, you know, again, I think that raising awareness of the respiratory therapy profession is important. And then, you know, I hope that after the pandemic, then people will look towards our profession as a career opportunity to help people and really fill up a lot of the jobs that are available nowadays.
Right now in Chicago, about 80% of staffed ICU beds are occupied and about 32% of ventilators are being used. That's according to state data. Nida, with another more contagious strain just a state away in both Indiana and Wisconsin, how concerned about you that this could change, that those numbers could go up?
I do feel that it will change, especially hearing that it's more contagious and, you know, a lot of people are still not following simple rules such as wearing masks, and a lot of people are scared to get the vaccine. I mean, I've gotten the vaccine, so hopefully we could start developing a herd immunity and get ahead of this new strain that's coming our way. But, you know, we're fully staffed, we got our ventilators, and we're ready. We're ready to take on the fight.
Nida Perez, Brady Scott, we hope that we wish you the best with that fight, and we all hope for everybody's sake that that fight soon diminishes somewhat. Many thanks to you both.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
And now, Paris, we go back to you.
Thanks, Phil. And now we check back in with Brandis Friedman, who's co-anchoring tonight's show in North Lawndale as part of our Chicago Tonight in Your Neighborhood series. Brandis.
In Paris, earlier today, we stopped by the Stone Temple Baptist Church on Douglas Boulevard here in North Lawndale, and we spoke with Pastor Roshona Fitzpatrick about the church's long history, but also how it's pivoted during the pandemic.
We've adapted by realizing that we have a responsibility to our community, and is to do whatever we can to make sure that people understand what this pandemic is all about and what we need to do to rally together to show some sense of unity in how we're going to help one another out of this situation. So we've partnered with organizations in the community and even outside of the community to provide food, to provide clothing, to provide toiletries and PPE. And it's really been a wonderful experience.
So just now, for example, you know, we saw a food donation arrive and you've got some people helping to set up for it. Tell us what's going on there.
So you know what, that brings me so much joy, because I'll get a call early in the morning and they'll say, hey, we got a shipment, can you guys use anything? And my answer is always yes, because people can always use something, especially in the midst of a pandemic. So I got a call from UCAN, which is an organization that's right around the corner. And I lined up people who are willing to help and who are willing to serve. And my guy goes to pick up the goodies, he brings them back, we set up a table outside. And one of the things I love to do is to make it as beautiful as possible. So we'll put a tablecloth on it because I want people to come and have a sense of dignity. Like, this is just not a food pantry. This is a place where you can come and get some really good food items, because I'm excited about the sausages that are there and the pasta that is there. So we come, we set up, and usually I do a Facebook post, and before you know it, everything that we have been given from the community goes out to the community, and that brings me a sense of joy, because I feel like we've done what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to be servants. I am a proponent of the scripture that says, you know, we're our brother's keeper. It's my responsibility to serve, and if I'm not serving, I'm really not living.
What would you say are some of the needs in the North Lawndale community, especially during the pandemic?
So one of the things I'll say, education about the pandemic, empowering people on where to get help, and there's been a lot of disenfranchisement in this community since the 50s, so for a very, very long time. And so now people are being generous. And I want them to generously come to North Lawndale, find a group of people that want to be empowered, and to empower them with educational tools, with entrepreneurship tools, that they can start their own businesses, because right now that's what people are doing, because it's gotten so difficult to hold a regular 9-to-5 because of the pandemic. People are inside. So let's be creative while you're inside. Let's do some things. So we're working on trying to get a entrepreneur hub where we can get leaders and people in the community to come and to share skills and to teach and train and develop, so that people can empower themselves. And, you know, instead of having to come to the table, they can bring something to the table. So that's exciting me because it's happening.
Tell us a little bit about the history of your church's building. There are a lot of former synagogues in the North Lawndale community.
Yeah. So Stone Temple was originally a Jewish synagogue. In 1926, it was built as the Romanian temple. And one of the things I like to tell people, I get excited when I'm asked, is that when you come to Stone Temple, you're actually coming to a place where a queen was and also the king. So the Romanian queen came in 1926, graced the place. So when you cross the threshold, you are in a place that's queenly and also kingly. And I like to share that story because Dr. King spent a lot of time at Stone Temple also in the 60s. So there's a lot of history at Stone Temple, and we try to continue to tell that history. For example, this garden tells some of the history too, because these tablets were inside of the church, these Jewish tablets. So we brought them out because we have a partnership with Chicago Sinai, and they help actually keep this garden together. They're our partners, and we love them. They come here often with us, and we want to use this stage as a way of telling our narratives, our Jewish family and our African American family, to bridge those histories together so that there is a spirit of unity here.
And you mentioned Dr. King having preached here when he spent time here in the 60s. Tell us about that.
So yeah, in the 60s, Dr. King was here making sure that this community was aware of what was happening and what he was trying to do as it relates to civil rights. And so he spent time having rallies here, bringing people together, talking about redlining, talking about how all of this disenfranchisement was happening, not just in the South, but even in the North. And even still today, it still exists. Systemic racism is very real, and it continues to happen, and we have to stand up against it. People have biases that they don't even really know about. So let's go inside of ourselves and see what can we get rid of to bring us all together. And that is what's interesting, because there's a lot going on now, and everybody's talking, and that's what I love, because everybody's talking. But now it's more than talk. Everybody can see, and everybody can be activated in the process of ending systemic racism, because it does exist.
And of course, that's Pastor Roshona Fitzpatrick of Stone Temple Missionary Baptist Church here in North Lawndale. There at the end, you hear her mention that Dr. King, Reverend King, preached there back in the 60s. We're going to have more on Reverend King's historic time in North Lawndale. That's coming up Sunday on Chicago Tonight Black Voices. Paris?
A lot of great history at that church. All right, thank you, Brandis. And up next, it may be the middle of winter, but we go to the archives for a sweet treat from last July in an encore presentation of Ask Jeffrey. But first, we take a look at the weather.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part through the generous support of the Julius Frankel Foundation.
In 1984, President Ronald Reagan turned his sweet tooth into national news when he decreed the month of July to be National Ice Cream Month. That's why Jeffrey Bayer considers it his patriotic duty to give us the scoop on some sweet, creamy history in tonight's Ask Jeffrey. Hey, Jeffrey.
Anything for the team.
Anything for the team. All right, they give you the tough assignments. So a few weeks ago, you answered a question about the building material known as the Chicago brick. So tonight we have a follow-up to that question. This is from Mary Ulrich in Ravenswood Garden. She wants to know, your segment on brick reminded me of an ice cream treat I remember from the 1950s called Chicago brick. It was orange sherbet with vanilla and caramel. I'd like to know its history, whether it was just a regional flavor, and if it is still available. So what exactly is Chicago brick ice cream?
Right, so people can probably picture Neapolitan ice cream, which is divided into lateral sections of chocolate, vanilla, and strawberry. So as our viewer points out, Chicago brick ice cream was basically the same idea, except that the layers were different. They were orange sherbet, vanilla, and caramel.
Okay, so why do they take that Neapolitan ice cream and call it Chicago brick? Does it actually have to do with clay bricks?
Well, you know, that was my first theory. And as you can see in this image, the colors of the flavors mixed together definitely do resemble the color palette of real Chicago bricks, which I featured a few weeks ago on Ask Jeffrey. But we could not find any evidence that the name has anything to do with that. And in fact, this ice cream variety wasn't even unique to Chicago. We found ads for Chicago brick ice cream as far away as Oklahoma and Nebraska in the 1910s and the 1930s. So, of course, you know, not knowing where else to turn, we asked Chicago cultural historian Tim Samuelson about this confectionery conundrum. And he broke it down. He said that as far as the brick part of the name, well, that was just once a common reference to the shape of a block of ice cream, no matter what the flavor. In fact, as early as the 1860s, bricks of ice cream became popular in sweet shops all over the country. The shop would cut a brick-shaped slab and wrap it up for you to take home, and then you'd slice it up into individual servings. Now, this flavor called Chicago brick started appearing in ice cream parlors in the mid-1880s, and it could be found in grocery stores starting in the late 1940s. And a few local manufacturers produced Chicago brick flavor, including Borden's, Walgreens, and Dean's. But as far as why the name Chicago is in there, unfortunately, Tim Samuelson came up dry as well.
And if Tim Samuelson doesn't know, you know it's a deep mystery. So, Jeffrey, can you get it anywhere today?
Well, it was out of stock at every store we checked. It is still made by one local ice cream producer called Dfa Brands in Batavia and sold under the Dean's Country Fresh label, but they only release it as an occasional limited edition. Our contact at DFA said that if they get enough requests, you know, they might bring the flavor back. So we could start a movement here, folks. If you want to taste a bit of Chicago history, give them a call.
I anticipate a letter writing campaign after this episode. Anyway, you were holding a bowl of supposed Chicago brick ice cream up earlier. So what was that?
Yeah, next to the brick wall. Okay, well, we cheated a little there. Our producer, Erica Gunderson, discovered that an ice cream parlor in Wilmette called Homer's carries the 3 separate flavors. So she asked them to pack them into a single quart to simulate Chicago brick, but Homer's doesn't actually offer that.
Are there any other Chicago flavored ice cream flavors?
Well, there is another one, and it has a misleading name. Southsiders probably know the Palmer House flavor as the middle layer of a rainbow cone, which, you know, if you come from down on the south side, that's the towering 5-layer treat from the nearly century-old shop of the same name, which is in the Beverly neighborhood. Palmer House is a vanilla ice cream studded with cherries and walnuts, but it was not invented at the legendary Palmer House Hotel. According to Rainbow Cone's owner, Lynn Sapp, her grandfather, Joseph Sapp, the shop's founder, wanted to put a Chicago stamp on a New York ice cream that was vanilla and cherry flavor, and it was called Palmer. So he added walnuts to the recipe, and he added the name House so that it honored the legendary Palmer House Hotel. Oh, and by the way, Dove bars were also invented in Chicago. Chicago candy store owner Leo Stefanos invented the chocolate-dipped ice cream bar in the 1950s, supposedly after seeing his son running recklessly down the street after an ice cream truck. He decided it would make his son safer if he just invented his own ice cream bar.
All right, Jeffrey, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
And don't forget that you can visit our website for more of Chicago's history. And while you're there, don't forget to submit your own question to Jeffrey Baer. That's all at WTTW.com/news.
Ask Jeffrey is made possible in part by the Mollenhauer Progressive Philanthropic Fund in honor of Ida Mollenhauer.
Once again, that was taped back in July. And that is our show for this Thursday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing. And you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news.
You can also get the show via podcast and on the PBS video app. And please join us tomorrow night live at 7 for the Weekend Review. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you so much for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that's proud to serve its community through pro bono legal services.